This is the fourth and final video for my How to Flat Tow a Ford Bronco series. In this video, I'll be installing and setting up the Blue Ox Patriot 3 BRK 2019 braking system into my 2022 Ford Bronco Outer Banks. I will also show you how to enable a neutral tow mode in the Bronco, go over the completed system, and how to actually hook the Bronco up for towing, as well as go over whether or not the Bronco's odometer adds miles while being towed. The previous videos, the parts I used to make the 6th Gen Ford Bronco flat towable, and the schematic pertaining to this video are all in the description. With that, let's get started. The Patriot 3 brake system is a device which physically presses on your Bronco's brake pedal when it detects that your tow vehicle is braking. This is likely accomplished through an accelerometer. There are some pros and cons to this, but I'll get to this a bit later after the install. It also has a pull pin connection that acts as a grenade pin, so to speak. Should your Bronco ever get detached while being towed, a special pin gets removed on the breakaway switch, which will alert the braking system to fully engage the brakes so that your Bronco doesn't go flying off a cliff. The first thing I had to do was modify the power connector the Patriot came with. I decided to do this because it came with a cigarette lighter style connection, which is fine except for the fact that the Bronco shuts all accessory power off after 45 minutes, which will render the Patriot useless. I've said this before, but with modern cars having all kinds of smarts like this, they should have known better, or at a minimum mention something about this in the manual. Regardless, this means that a plug that is always powered by the battery has to be installed inside the Bronco. You could probably install a new cigarette outlet somewhere in the footwell, but I found that to be really clunky. Instead, I bought a set of flat pin connectors, fuse holder, 10 amp fuse, and 16 gauge 2 conductor cable. I'm pretty sure I got this cable from the excess I cut off from the Patriot unit. First, I swapped out the connector on the Patriot by soldering it. The polarity should be as follows. The ribbed wire I soldered to the red wire on the flat pin connector, which is the female receptor. The smooth wire I soldered to the white wire on the flat pin connector, which goes to the male plug. Then, I soldered the flat pin connector to the 2 conductor cable. It is important to make sure that the exposed pin winds up being the ground pin. Initially, I installed this with 12 volts on the exposed pin, and I kept blowing my 10 amp fuse. This is because the pin would brush up against the exposed chassis on the Bronco and basically short at 12 volts to ground. I guess the good news here was that I installed a fuse. I did not yet route the flat pin cable through the Bronco because this needs to happen at the same time with what comes next, which is the breakaway switch cable. The breakaway switch cable, which came with the Patriot, has an 1/8 inch TS plug on the brake side and a flat plug to connect to the breakaway switch. I decided to start this cable in the footwell and route it through a handy grommet that's down there. I drilled a couple of holes, one for the breakaway switch cable and another for the power supply cable. The breakaway switch cable I routed through the engine bay, behind the fuse holder, and strategically fastening it where it was loose using reusable zip ties. The breakaway cable's endpoint was the driver's side tow adapter plate, which I installed in a previous video. Likewise, I routed the cable I made with the flat pin connector using the same path as the breakaway cable through the grommet, only this cable stopped at the battery. Once this cable was at the battery, I soldered the fuse holder to the positive wire of the cable, then attached ring terminals to both the positive and negative wires. I inserted a 10 amp fuse into the fuse holder. Using the multimeter, ensure that the exposed pin is grounded. It should read 0 volts between this pin and any exposed chassis bolt on the Bronco. If it doesn't, disconnect the ring terminals from the battery and resolder the connector in the correct orientation. I installed the breakaway switch here to the base plate. I used my own bolt and lock nut, as well as some blue Loctite. I don't know why the breakaway switch only has this one mounting point, so I used a zip tie to secure the front end, as well as clamping down on its cable. Then I connected the breakaway switch cable, making sure there was nothing dangling loose. It has to be installed sturdy enough to allow the pin to be pulled out cleanly in case of vehicle separation. Assuming everything was installed properly, it's time to set up the Patriot brake assist. I start by opening the locking brake claw all the way, which locks it in place that way. Then I slip it over the brake and press a button at the top to snap the spring mechanism back and have it lock onto the brake pedal. The ideal spacing between the Patriot and the seat should be such that you can fit your hand between them. Also, and this is very important, make sure you raise the leveling feet on the Patriot high enough so that no portion of it touches the seat adjustment lever if you have one. because if it sits too low, it'll press with enough force against that lever when activated that it'll move the seat back and render itself useless. The 1/8" TS plug goes into the breakaway port, and the flat plugs get connected for power. Now you can press the power button and the unit will start alternating its LED lights. Press the setup button and the unit will actuate the brake fully, provided the Bronco is in neutral tow mode. If the unit was set up correctly, the green power LED should remain steady. Inside your RV or tow vehicle, you'll be plugging in the RF controller that came with your braking system. Shortly after getting plugged in, it should have a screen like this which says that the breakaway is ready. Through the RF controller, you can configure your settings, both how sensitive the Patriot is, as well as how hard it will apply the brakes or force. I keep mine at a force level 2 and a sensitivity of level 3, but this is unique to my situation, so you'll have to dial it in until it feels about right. Now that I've shown everything that I installed, I will show you how to actually flat tow your Bronco. First, I place the appropriately rated tow bar into the tow vehicle's receiver hitch and make sure that it has both the pin as well as the R-clip or hitch pin retaining clip installed. The safety cables, as well as the breakaway pin cable, get attached to your trailer hitch. For mine, I had to provide a larger carabiner to fit the loop. Next, I extend the tow bar and put it on the ground and bring the Bronco right over them. The front camera is a great help here. I attach one bar to each baseplate attachment tab and secure them with the pin and quick pin. The safety cables come next, and they shouldn't touch the locking handles. Then comes the breakaway cable, latched into the grenade pin. And for the final hookup, the 7 to 6 pin coiled cable gets attached between the tow vehicle and into the 6-pin connector that was installed on the Bronco. Now we're ready to enable the neutral tow mode on the Bronco. Make sure the Bronco isn't too high and that the parking brake is off. If the engine is running, turn it off. Press the start button without pressing on the brake pedal. This turns on all accessory power. Press and hold the brake and shift the Bronco into neutral. Press OK on the steering wheel for all the prompts that pop up on the screen, then press the button with the 3 lines on the steering wheel to enter the main menu. Navigate all the way to the bottom for settings, press OK, and navigate to neutral tow. Press and hold OK until the screen changes and says neutral tow enabled. You should be able to hear the transfer case make the switch. Make sure your foot is off the brake, press the start button again, and most things will turn off. This step is vital. If you don't press the start button here, I've noticed that the Bronco will actually add miles to the odometer while being towed. But it is not so with everything off. If you want to double check and make sure that neutral mode is still enabled, simply close and open the door again, and the dash display will turn on and tell you that neutral mode is enabled. It is at this point that I set up the Patriot brake assist and turn it on. Refer back to earlier in the video for all the steps to accomplish this. Now we're ready to perform our final checks for takeoff. At this point I go into the RV, make sure my RF controller is on, and I test the turn signals and lights with my wife signaling to me whether the Bronco is signaling as it is supposed to. Then I slowly start to move forward in order to allow the tow bar to click into place. My wife will signal to me if they click into place, and she also pays attention to make sure that the Bronco is rolling freely as it is supposed to. With everything kosher, we take off on our next journey. It helps also to have a dash receiver that allows you to keep the rear camera on at all times. This allows me to not only monitor the Bronco, but gives me an excellent extra piece of visibility, particularly when merging. To disable neutral tow mode, remove the brake assist, press the start button but don't press on the brake pedal, then press down on the brake pedal for 7 seconds, and shift the car into park. You should be able to hear the transfer case shift, and the dash will tell you that neutral mode has been disabled. Under some circumstances it may complain and say that shift is delayed or that you even need to service the advanced track system, but this is usually resolved after you start the car and roll it forward a few feet. From here, if you want to start the car, press the start button to turn everything off, put your foot on the brake pedal, press the start button, and the car will turn on. Because I don't have my sensitivity up all that high, there are times when I need to manually activate the brake assist. By pressing and holding the brake button, that is precisely what it does. It'll push on the Bronco's brakes until I release the button. The pros of this system is that it is relatively easy to set up and won't require any special plumbing into your brakes. The cons are that you will need to be very careful about dialing in the settings on the wireless display that comes with this braking system. I've had issues where this unit sensed that I was braking even though I was not. This resulted in me having to come to a sudden and full stop so the braking unit could reset from this strange condition, and instilling in me a sense of irony that I was dragging along a disobedient horse behind me. It happened several times while I was climbing uphill over some rough asphalt. I called Blue Ox about this, and their only suggestion was that I reduce the sensitivity of the braking system. Finally, we are done. It is definitely possible to accomplish all of this work yourself and make the Ford Bronco flat towable. Just know that this is very involved. I believe it took me the larger part of 3 days to install everything, and even longer to dial in all the fine-tuning. Though I will say that all the fine-tuning I have described up front. You won't have to find out the hard way why fuses keep blowing, batteries keep dying, or why the odometer is racking up miles when it shouldn't be. I've been told at the time that I purchased my RV that paying a shop to do it would run about $5,000, labor and materials included. Truthfully, that is exactly how much labor you will probably expend, $2,500 worth, maybe more. The materials are roughly $2,500 all told. Like I mentioned, I didn't have any particularly compelling reasons to go with mostly Blue Ox on all my materials other than availability, and while they certainly have their shortcomings for installation and performance, I think that overall the system has performed admirably. I've been traveling for about 5 months and 3,000 miles now from coast to coast, and now that I've more or less mastered the usage of the system, I haven't had any problems, or my Bronco winding up at the bottom of a ravine. I hope this video series has helped demystify the flat towing process, and maybe even given some inspiration to manufacturers for the sort of things that should be updated or standardized when creating a flat towing kit for the Ford Bronco. Until next time, thank you for watching.